Good day, everyone. I am here to give you a discussion on the use of punctuation marks. When we write, sometimes we encounter some difficulties with regard to the use of correct punctuations or punctuation marks in our sentences. Well, in most cases, we find the use of period, question marks, exclamation marks very easy. However, sometimes we experience difficulties in the use of commas, semicolons, and colons. So that is the purpose of this discussion, for me to discuss comprehensively the proper use of a comma, semicolon, and a colon. So before anything else, let us analyze this paragraph first. So we have here a paragraph that reads, I am studying hard because I have many dreams to achieve. These dreams include becoming an engineer, having my own mansion, and buying a luxurious car. More than this, I also dream of giving my parents a comfortable living. Being a student, I will strive hard to achieve all my dreams in life. I will reach my dreams. Now, the problem with paragraphs that do not have any punctuation marks is that sometimes we find it very difficult to understand. We find it difficult as well to unravel the intended meaning because of the lack of stops or pauses in the paragraph. With the presence of punctuation marks such as commas or semicolons, we could easily identify the different chunks of meaning in a certain paragraph. And so, if we were to correct this paragraph by placing correct punctuation marks, it should look like this. If you notice, we place a comma here and another comma here. And then this comma after the word this, another comma after the word student. This way, we could better understand that, for example, in sentence number 2, there is a series or there is an enlistment having parallel clauses such as becoming an engineer, having my own mansion, and buying a luxurious car. That is the very importance of the correct use of punctuation marks, specifically commas, semicolons, and colons. So let's discuss first the use of a comma. When do we use a comma in a sentence? Well, what we learned before is that commas are used when we want to put a pause in our structures, in our sentences. Well, that's correct, but there are certain rules that we need to remind ourselves about, specifically in the use of this punctuation mark. Rule number 1, you have to use commas to separate elements in a series of 3 or more words or word groups. Now, in a sentence, there are instances in which there are series, okay, parallel structures or word groups. And in order for us to separate every element in these series, we need to place a comma in between them. For example, the sentence, John, Jonas, and Nick are cousins. So here we have a series here, John, Jonas, and Nick with 3 elements. In order for us to distinguish one element from the others or from the rest, we need to place a comma here. So 1 comma after John, another comma after Jonas. Some of us might say that there is no need for us to put a comma anymore before the word end, but we have this comma called Oxford comma. And so this comma here found before the word end is termed as an Oxford comma, which is very essential in writing. Oxford commas need to be placed before the conjunction and or in a series, okay, for example, in a series like this where there are 3 or more elements, so that there could be a distinguishing mark between the last 2 elements of the series, in this case, Jonas and Nick. Another one, last summer, we went to Boracay, Palawan, and Paris. So here, we placed a comma after Boracay, after Palawan, so that we could distinguish Palawan and Paris. So it's very important for us to place Oxford commas, most especially in a series of 3 or more elements. And most particularly when there are cited addresses or places, because Oxford commas are a way for us to separate elements. Now, if we remove a comma, for example here, Palawan and Paris, if we remove the comma here, some people who might have no idea where Palawan and Paris are might understand that Palawan and Paris could be a name for a hotel or a restaurant. So that's why we really need to put an Oxford comma here to distinguish Palawan from another place, which is Paris. Third sentence, we bought tomatoes, potatoes, and onions. So here, this is also another example of a series with three elements. So we place a comma before, an Oxford comma before the word and. There's also this exception to rule number 1. Don't use any commas, however, if all items in a series are separated by a coordinating conjunction. So if you do not want to use commas to separate elements in the series, you may also use conjunctions instead. Example, he will buy tomatoes and potatoes and onions. He may talk to Jones or Julie or Shane with regard to the problem. This is not grammatically incorrect. Okay, the problem here is the redundancy of the conjunction being mentioned in the sentence. Now, your option could be to use these conjunctions or to replace them with a comma to separate the elements in a series. We also use a comma to set off introductory phrase from the rest of the sentence. For example, sentence A, in case of emergency, please contact Mrs. Simpson. So our introductory sentence or phrase here rather is in case of emergency. Same goes here in item B, already late. So to set off this one from the subject we, okay, we use a comma here as a separator. Same is the case when we use common starter words for sentences. Example, we have because of the fire, many people lost their homes. Since 2004, Joe has been working in UM. So the use of comma here in items A and B is instrumental to make sure that the introductory clauses are separated from the main sentence. And then rule number 3B, common introductory phrases that should be followed by a comma include participial and infinitive phrases. So there are also sentences that are started with a participial phrase. So when you say participial phrase, it's verb plus ing functioning as a noun, okay, or as an adjective in a sentence. And then infinitive phrase is basically the formula is to plus verb, okay, and then the noun phrase. So sentence A, dancing at the party, comma, Sheree was exhausted. So this is also an introductory phrase. Another example of an introductory phrase in the form of an infinitive phrase is sentence B. To get a higher score, comma, you have to study. Rule number 3C, common introductory words that should be followed by a comma include yes, however, and well. For example, here in the first sentence, yes, comma, I believe that he can do it. Now, there is a distinction when you put an exclamation mark instead of a comma after the word yes. So if it's like yes and then exclamation mark, it means the word yes functions as an interjection, a word that signals strong emotions. But if it is yes with a comma, it is an adverb of affirmation. It's just affirming. The same is true when you use the word no. So if you use no to negate, okay, so it should be no, comma. But if you use no to express strong emotion, such as strong negation about something, it should be no with an exclamation mark. Okay. Other words include well and however as introductory words to a sentence. Rule number 4. In English language sentences or in grammar, we have this concept called appositive. An appositive is a phrase or a noun phrase which is usually found after a subject, okay, or another noun. This appositive functions as an additional description about the noun or the subject of the sentence. So we need to use commas to set them off, the appositives, from the main subject of the sentence. Example, an achiever is our class president. So an achiever here is an added description to an. So this is our appositive in this sentence. Now to separate this one from the main subject, which is an, we need to use two commas as separators. So here we can also see how important commas are to distinguish an added description from the main subject or the word being modified or described. Rule number 5, we also use commas to set off non-restrictive clauses, clauses that do not add essential information to a sentence. For example, when you say, my classmate, a Filipino, is my best friend, meaning if there is an added description that you think is added there only for the purpose of having that phrase or clause added in the sentence, but it's not really an important part of the sentence, you may use commas to set it off from the main sentence. So for example, here, my classmate, a Filipino, is my best friend. With or without the phrase a Filipino, the sentence my classmate is my best friend and its meaning will not change. So that means the phrase a Filipino here is an example of a non-restrictive clause. Okay? Meaning this may be removed from the sentence, and once removed, it may not change the meaning of the sentence. So it will still be my classmate is my best friend. The same is with the sentence. Pineapples, which are my favorite fruit, are the main ingredients in this recipe. Okay? So even if you state in the sentence that pineapples are your favorite fruit or not, it will not change the fact that pineapples are still the main ingredients in the recipe. So this is an example of a non-restrictive clause which may be separated from the subject using commas in the sentence. Okay? Now, we also have the opposite, the restrictive clause. If non-restrictive clauses are insignificant or not important in a sentence, restrictive clause is otherwise, meaning it is an essential part of a sentence. That means we should not separate them using commas and instead integrate them as part of the sentence. Example, many rock stars who recorded hits in the 1980s made little money from their songs. Now, if you notice, there are no commas in the sentence. And if we look at this sentence very closely, the added description could be this phrase, who recorded hits in the 1980s. Now, why did we not place any comma here before or after this phrase or added description? It's because this clause is an important fact or detail or information in the sentence. Therefore, this phrase is not considered as a non-restrictive, rather a restrictive clause. So, this one is very important for us to really specify who are these rock stars being referred to in the sentence. Now, to be specific, these are the rock stars who recorded hits in the 1980s, not just any other rock stars coming from other periods of music or genres. Okay? So that's basically how we distinguish restrictive from non-restrictive clauses. Now, rule number 6. We also use commas to separate independent clauses when they are joined by any of the FANBOYS. Now, in English, FANBOYS stand for the coordinating conjunctions for, and, nor, but, or, yet so. So, when you check out the sentence, you have to locate first if there is any coordinating conjunction used. And if there is any, double check if what is being connected by that conjunction, any of these FANBOYS, are two independent clauses. Now, when you say independent clauses, meaning these are clauses that appear like or that look like a sentence with a complete thought. Okay? Let's check sentence 1 in here. I already ate my lunch, comma, but I am still hungry. Now, we have the FANBOYS here. The B for FANBOY stands for but. Okay? The word but here connects two groups of words. The first group is I already ate my lunch. The second one is I am still hungry. Okay? Now, if both of these groups contain a complete thought or are considered independent clauses, we need to put a comma before the FANBOYS. Okay, or the coordinating conjunction. In this case, the first group, I already ate my lunch. This one expresses a complete thought, right? And then the second one, I am still hungry. This also expresses a complete thought. That means complete thought connected by the word but with another complete thought, then we need to put here a comma before the word but. Okay. Notice also this example in item 2. She did not study, so she failed in the exam. Now we use here the letter S in FANBOYS, which is so, as a coordinating conjunction. Now let's double check if there are two groups with complete thought being connected by this conjunction. She did not study. It's a complete thought, right? I mean, it's a sentence with a complete thought. And then the second one, she failed in the exam. It's another sentence with a complete thought. So since two groups of words with complete thought are connected with the word so, one of the fanboys, then we need to put a comma here. Now the question is, what if a conjunction, any of these fanboys, connects two groups of words and then the other one does not express a complete thought? Let's say it's a dependent clause. Now in this case, there is no need for us to put a comma before the fanboys or the coordinating conjunction. Okay, I hope that one is very clear. Now, rule number 7 in the use of commas, we use this punctuation mark to set off geographical names, items in dates, addresses, and titles in names. So for example, in sentence 1, I live in Bangkerohan, Davao City. So to separate specific place from the general one. I was born on May 29, 1994. So we know that the use of comma here is very important too. And then if there are professional titles at the end of a person's name. For example, Professor June Paredes, MAEd, is our teacher in English. So we use a comma in these instances. So commas are actually simpler compared to semicolons because semicolons have more rules, and some of the rules followed in the use of commas could also be used in observing the rules for the use of a semicolon. So that's why we really need to master first the use of commas so that we would know when to use a semicolon correctly in a sentence. So rule number 1, use a semicolon in place of a period to separate two sentences where the conjunction has been left out. Now, if we go back to my previous discussion on rule number 1 for the use of commas, we may use conjunctions in replacement of commas, right? For example, the repetitive use of or in a sentence, okay, for series or to separate elements in a series. Now, we can also use a semicolon to connect two sentences, but make sure that these two sentences are relevant and may be connected by any of the fanboys or the coordinating conjunction. For example, sentence 1, I paid my tuition, I took the exam. Okay? If you notice, these two are relevant sentences. And these may be connected using a semicolon in between. Now, if we replace this semicolon with fanboys, we can actually use, or we can actually say, I paid my tuition, so I took the exam. So if we use the word so here, that means I paid my tuition, comma, so I took the exam, right? Because two groups of words with complete thought are connected with the word so, or by the word so. In this case, if we would not want to use the word so, then we can replace it with a semicolon. Same is true in sentence 2. Please report this evening, semicolon. I will return the borrowed items. Now, if we are to replace this one with fanboys, then we can use here for. Please report this evening, comma, for I will return the borrowed items. And we can also use a semicolon in view of the conjunction or the fanboys. Okay? Rule number 2. We use semicolon before introductory words such as namely, however, therefore, that is, or id est. Okay, that's the meaning for ie. For example, or exempli gracia, e.g., or for instance, when they introduce a complete sentence. For example, sentence 1, I believe her, semicolon. However, she got some weak points in her argument. Now, notice the clause here after the word however. She got some weak points in her argument. This clause expresses a complete thought. If these words mentioned here Namely, however, therefore, that is, for example, or for instance, connect the first part of the sentence with a second part that has a complete thought, for example, sentence 1, then the use of semicolon here before, however, and a comma after is necessary. Another one, I have a great passion in the arts, semicolon, that is, comma, I make handicrafts. If you notice, the phrase I make handicrafts expresses a complete thought, right? That means we need to put a semicolon here and a comma. Now, what if we say, I have a great passion in the arts? That is, example, painting. So painting is not or does not have a complete thought, right? So the way we write id est here, or that is only comma, ie, and then another comma. Okay? If the next or the following phrase is or does not have a complete thought. We also use semicolon to separate units of a series when one or more of the units contain commas. Now, if we go back to rule number 1, there's a necessity for us to use commas to separate elements in a series, right? Now, what if every element in the series already uses a comma as a separator? How will we separate now every element containing a comma with from the rest of the elements or units in the series? Example, sentence 1. Last summer, I went to Rojas City, Capiz. Rojas City, Capiz is one element, right? Fatima General Santos City is another element. Turil Davao City is another element. So we have 3 elements in this sentence alone. And if you notice, in every element, there is already a comma. That means that we cannot use a comma anymore as a separator for every element in this series. So instead, we can use semicolons. That's why we use semicolon here and then another semicolon here. Okay? So that's how we use semicolons in the context of series or elements in units in a series. Okay? The last rule I discussed with regard to the rule in the use of comma is to check if there is a coordinating conjunction or any of the FANBOYS. And then double check if this FANBOYS or this coordinating conjunction connects two independent clauses or two groups of words with complete thought, right? Now, what if we have a sentence that uses any of the FANBOYS and that these two parts are independent clauses, plus there is an introductory phrase where you will be using a comma. What will happen now to the comma before the FANBOYS here? If you notice, example, in this sentence, let's disregard first during the annual parade. Okay, imagine this one is not part of the sentence. Focus only on many students flock as they wear their best attires and colorful floats also line up on the crowded street. If we focus only on this sentence, that means here we have the FANBOYS end, right? Double check if the first two groups are complete or not in terms of thought. Many students flock as they wear their best attires. That's one complete thought. Colorful floats also line up on the crowded street. Another complete thought. So we could have used a comma here. Now, in this sentence, we are using a semicolon because there is already a comma here after the introductory phrase. So the rule is, if there's a need for you to use a comma before the FANBOYS or the coordinating conjunction, but if there is already an existing comma prior to the conjunction, then we need to use a semicolon instead, okay? Not a comma anymore. I hope that one is clear. So the use of semicolon may be complicated because of this rule. And the other one I discussed, this one, in terms of the use of semicolon for series or elements. But among these three, colon, semicolon, and commas, colons are actually the easiest one to use in a sentence. So here, we use this after an independent clause that precedes a list. So for example, there is an independent clause, and then after to it is a series or is a list, then we can use a colon. Example, there are 3 best ways to succeed in college life. So this one is an independent clause, right? Because this one has a complete thought. And then what follows next is a list: study, strive, and pray. So to introduce these 3 verbs here, we can use a colon. During summer, he loves to do hiking, biking, and camping. Okay, or if we want to simplify this sentence, we can simply say during summer, he loves to hike, bike, and camp. Okay, to make the sentence more parallel. Rule number 2, to separate an explanation or example from a preceding independent clause, we can also use a a colon. Finally, I have made my decision. So what is that decision? Colon, continue my passion in teaching. Number 2, my mom believes in the golden rule. What's that golden rule? Colon, do not do unto others what you do not want others do unto you. Okay? So a colon here is somewhat like a signal, okay, to signal that there is something, okay, a statement or a notion or a sentence or a clause that will be introduced. Okay? And of course, we use a colon for salutations in a business letter. Okay, dear Miss De Leon, dearest Mr. Laksamana. We do not use commas for salutations because commas are informal. Okay, so for salutations in letters, it will really be formal if we use colons like this. And then we also use colons in the heading of a business memorandum. Example, to, subject, and from. So the to, from, and subject lines. Then we know that we use colons between the hour and the minutes of time. Example, this one. And then also in Bible verses, citations in literary works, and volume number of some publications. Okay. So I think that's all for this brief discussion on the use of punctuation marks. Now, if you have some confusion with the use of punctuation marks, it will be best to really go back to the different rules so that you could better understand how each of these punctuation marks functions in a sentence. It's also very important to know when to use correctly these punctuation marks so that we could effectively convey our message. Now, in technical or academic writing, or even in business letter writing, if we fail to recognize how important punctuation marks are, there might be some mistakes or lapses or worse, errors if repeatedly done in your write-ups or in your compositions, which may, for example, in the context of a business, may put the business at stake if there are minor issues with grammar and mechanics. So that's why grammar should go hand in hand with punctuation marks so that you could produce the best message or the most effective message that you want to channel towards your reading audience. Okay, so that's all for the discussion of punctuation marks. If you have any question, you may comment or you may post your questions here in the open forum. Thank you very much for watching this video discussion.